Welcome to Fortune Forecast. I am Daisy, your hostess, and in this video we continue on with the book titled Thoughts Are Things, and it was written by Prentice Mulford, and it is in the public domain. If you just found us at this video, I would encourage you to go to our book playlist and grab the previous chapters there. And if you want to speed forward to the next chapter, please do get to the timestamp and jump ahead. I'm going to stay here for a bit and share my narrator's comments on the previous chapter. So the previous chapter touched up on a lot of good things. And he started with the idea that thoughts were currents, or thoughts are currents, and run in currents as real as those like air and water. So if we think of it that way, for me, it resonates deeply with that. And he was suggesting that the things that we talk about and the things that we think attract to us like current, other things as well. So the author is suggesting that the things that we talk about and the things that we think about as they're traveling through current also flow in this pool of thoughts and acts on our mind for good or evil or ill. And the author suggested that if we could see these thoughts, we would see them emanating as currents in and out of, people. He also was suggesting that people of the same temperament and the same character seem to have entertain similar thoughts. And one thing that I thought was interesting was that I interpreted as that as these similar energies or thought waves seem to gravitate towards each other, then they seem to be like a boost. So if you're angry or you're depressed and now you're aligning with, or you become like a magnet for more of these thoughts, they seem to serve as a jumper or a boost to amplify your condition or your strength of thought or that particular state of mind that you are in. So if you are feeling low and sad or happy and vibrant, you're attracting more of that. Now, tell me if this hasn't happened to you in your life. I mean, it's happened to me. There's that one person, or maybe two, that they have this one topic, and that's all they want to immerse themselves in. They also want to immerse you into that. Let's say all they want to talk is about, their illness, they're sick, and the doctor's appointments, or their drama, and, the agony of their situation or the plight of the misery of their world. And the question is, are you going to allow yourself to sink into that energy thought, and then are you left better for it, or worse? That might help you figure out how to be around that environment if you need to be, or avoid it altogether. So I was really curious about the idea of thoughts as currents, and immediately I was thinking about radio waves. So I did a little search on the internet and ended up on a website from weather.gov, and they were talking about radio waves and electromagnetic waves. And they're saying that they're not like sound waves in the sense that they don't need molecules to travel, because what they do is they travel through the air, through solid objects, even through space. And the thing is that makes electromagnetic waves different than radio waves, which I was thinking about, that maybe thoughts are more like electromagnetic currents, because the brain, according to many scientists, the brain runs electricity. So then I was thinking, okay, so what are electromagnetic waves? And I learned that electromagnetic waves travel through air, they travel through objects, they all travel through space. Yet there was a paragraph in their article saying that astronauts on spacewalks use radio to communicate, because radio waves are a type of electromagnetic wave. So in one sense, they're kind of saying, well, they're different, but in another sense, they're saying they're the same. And they went on to say that some waves can be blocked, but it depends on the density of the object that, it's heading to or bouncing off of. And it's interesting for me, I've learned, and maybe some of you have heard this too, where they're saying, well, you can block, you can, put up a shield and you can block the negative energy. So interesting. I started to think about that invisible wall that we can put up. And is that something that is real? And just because I don't have the science behind saying, hey, well, it works for me, doesn't mean that it is not true either. It's true for me, right? Also, on further research, I went to this website called Seeker.com, and I'm not endorsing these websites. It's just places where I get random information that I can share with you. So someone in that website posted a question like, well, how fast does thought travel? And I said, okay, well, is it measured? Did somebody finally measure a thought? Because what I've learned also is that while we may have brain waves, it's not the same thing as thought waves. And brainwave is measured as the synapses that it's going through the system itself to reach either, another part of the body, and it travels really fast. I'm telling you that. So on that website, Seeker.com, someone did ask that question, how fast does a thought travel? I wasn't really pleased with the answer. There was a response from a professor of kinesiology of the University of Toronto. His name is Tim Welsh, and he was kind of talking about the response of the neurons itself. But for me, I'm not sure if that has one thing to do with the other. And I would just suggest for you to, if you're interested, keep on researching because the answers are out here. Then in Quora, somebody else was also talking about, can thoughts travel outside of our brains? And if so, is there any technology that can pick up, the thought waves? So, there are a few people interested, and I'm sure that even our government would be interested in learning that because it would be very useful in, defense or counter-defense, however you will put that. Yet some people on there were going on to say that, well, there's no anecdotal evidence that there is. And some were saying that they had personal experiences that they're feeling that there's this collective, connection made with two or more people. And they've had experiences where, people were responding to something that was put out there of someone that's obviously close to them. Another point that I thought was interesting that this author was suggesting was the effect of the energies of the personalities. And in as much saying that the longer that you brood on a thought, whether it's a positive thought or a negative thought, the longer that you may find yourself either falling into the loop of that thought or attracting experiences or things that are very similar to those thoughts that you have been sitting in. And it's so much easier for people to see beautiful things when they're thinking beautiful things. And it's so much easier for people to look for problems when they're thinking about problems. Thirdly, the other thing that I thought was interesting from that previous chapter was the idea of things around our home or our surroundings that may hold a particular vibration because of the longer that it's been in the space of how we are making connection with it. And maybe you've heard of empaths that can feel and get impressions off of touching things. And I believe that is the density of the thought that has materialized around that energy. I myself, and maybe you have too, have gone into a place and you could pick up an impression. It's an impression. And many might say, well, you're an empath. This is no, that's just a skill that, just like your senses, the more that you can tune in, you can learn how to improve them. I mean, you have chefs that are out there that have the amazing palate because they take the time to understand what they're eating, to use all the parts of their gustatories, nerves to learn, the flavors of things. Or the sounds. And when I was a policewoman, I needed to learn how to feel impressions of certain places. And you do too. You go to a place and you look at the colors. You might have said, oh man, I feel creepy about this, or this is a fun place. And it's that impression. But then there's layers of things that your senses, your visual, the five senses are using with the extrasensory counterpart of the same senses, because I believe that for every of the five senses, we also have what I call the spirit sense that sees things a little bit more broader in a different way, that allows the left brain and the right brain to help us, evaluate and assess our situation. So again, I'm not a scientist. I'm just a person here applying common sense, trying to understand myself in the world that makes no sense. Okay, well, now that I've shared all this, let's move on to the next chapter. One way to cultivate courage. Courage and presence of mind mean the same thing. Presence of mind implies command of mind. Cowardice and lack of mental control mean about the same thing. Cowardice is rooted in hurry, the habit of hurry or lack of repose. All degrees of success are based on courage, mental or physical. All degrees of failure are based on timidity. You can cultivate courage and increase it at every minute and hour of the day. You can have the satisfaction of knowing that in everything you do, you have accomplished two things, namely, the doing of the thing itself, and by the manner of its doing, adding eternally to yourself another atom of the quality of courage. You can do this by the cultivation of deliberation, deliberation of speech, of walk, of writing, of eating, deliberation in everything. There is always a bit of fear where there is a bit of hurry. When you hurry to the train, you are in fear that you may be left. And with that comes fear of other possibilities consequent on your being left. When you hurry to the party, to the meeting of a person by appointment, you are in fear of some ill or damage resulting from not being in time. This habit of thought can, through an unconscious training, grow to such an extent as to pervade a person's mind at all times and places and bring on a fear of loss of some kind, when there is absolutely no loss to be sustained. For instance, a person may hurry to catch a streetcar and act and feel as if a great loss would occur did he not get on that particular car, when there may be another close behind, or at most 2 or 3 minutes waiting will bring it. Yet the fear of waiting, those 3 minutes, grows to a mountain in size and is in that person's mind a most disagreeable possibility. Through mere habit, a similar condition of hurry may characterize that person's walking, eating, writing, in short, everything he does, and will render it more and more difficult for such person to act with coolness and deliberation. The quality of mind or emotion underlying all this hurried mental condition and consequent hurried act is fear. Fear is but another name for lack of power to control our minds, in other words, to control the kind of thought we think or put out. It is this kind of unconscious mental training, which is very common, that begets a permanent condition of mind more and more liable to large and small panics at the least interruption of trivial disappointment. It makes disappointments when none are necessary. It is the ever opening wedge, letting in more and more the thought current of fear. For if you so cultivate fear of one thing, you are cultivating and increasing liability to fear in all things. If you allow yourself to sit in fear for half an hour that the carriage may not call for you in time to get to the boat or train, you are much more liable to be seized with a series of little panics at every trivial occurrence or obstacle occurring on that particular journey. In this way does this habit of mind enter into and is cultivated in the doing of so-called little things. You are writing or sewing or engaged in the performance of some work which is intensely interesting to you and in which you do not like to be interrupted. If sewing, you reach for your scissors which have dropped on the floor. You do this in a momentarily impatient mood and with a spasmodic, jerky action. Your mind, as the phase runs, is on your work. You will not take it off your work while reaching for the scissors. You are trying, in mind, to go on with your work and reach for the scissors at the same moment. You make the movement of muscles and the action of the body momentarily disagreeable and irksome because you refuse for the second to put into the act the force which it demands. When unconsciously you refuse to do this, any acts will become irksome and disagreeable, because there is not force enough let on to do the act with ease. It is the endeavor to do it with a weak body. You have the power of throwing your force instantly into any muscle, so making the act easy and pleasant. This capacity for turning on force on any part you will increases through cultivating it. And you can do a great deal more and do it better through this cultivation of deliberation. For deliberation can be as quick as thought, the more the mind is trained in that direction. If you pick up a pin or tie a shoe in a hurry, you do not so only because such act is irksome to you, but because you fear it may deprive you momentarily of some bit of pleasure. And there you have, again, opened your mind to the thought current of fear of losing something. The cultivation of courage commences in the cultivation of deliberation in so-called little acts like these. Deliberation and courage are as closely allied as fear and hurry. If we do not learn to govern our force properly in the doing of the smallest act, we shall find such government far less easy in the doing of all acts. If we analyze what we fear, we shall find we are in mind trying to deal with too much at once of the thing feared. There is only a relatively small amount to be dealt with now. In any transaction, in the doing of anything, there is but one step to be taken at a time. We need to place what force is necessary and no more on that one step. When that is taken, we can take the next. The more we train our minds so to concentrate on the one step, the more do we increase capacity for sending our force all in one given direction at once. Such force extends and should be so used in the so-called minutest details of everyday life. In this way, deliberation and deliberate action become habitual, and we are, in a sense, unconscious of making ourselves deliberate, even as after long training in the opposite and wrong direction, we are unconscious of putting on the hurried frame of mind. Timidity is often the result of looking at too many difficulties or terrors at once. In material reality, we have to deal with but one at a time. If we are going to what we fear will be a disagreeable interview with a harsh, irascible, overbearing person, we're apt to go, occupying our minds with the whole interview, setting ourselves down in the very middle of it and seeing it in mind as necessarily trying or disagreeable. Perhaps we were thinking of it this morning while we were dressing, but it was then our proper business to dress. To dress was a necessary step for the interview, and to dress well also. Possibly it occupied our thoughts while eating, but it was then our proper business to eat and get all the pleasure possible from our food. That was another step. The more reposeful our eating, the more vigorous will become our taste, and the more strength will our food give our bodies. Possibly the fear of this interview was on us as we walked to the place appointed for it, but it was then our proper business to walk and get from our walking all the pleasure we could. That was another step. Pleasure is the sure result of placing thought or force on the thing we are doing now, and pain of some sort in both present and future is the certain result of sending thought or force away from the act which needs to be done at this moment. When we dress, eat, walk, or do anything with mind placed on something else, we are making the present act irksome. We are training to make every act irksome and disagreeable. We are making the thing feared a certainty, for what we put out in thought as unpleasant is an actual thing, a reality. And the longer we continue to put it out, the more force we add to it, and the more likely it is to be realized in the physical world. To bring us what all want and are seeking for, namely happiness, we need to have perfect control of our mind and thought at all times and places. One most important and necessary means for gaining this lies in this discipline, regarding so-called little or trivial things. Just as the discipline and movement of any commences with the training of the private soldier's legs and arms. If you hurry and slur over these so-called petty details, you are the easier thrown off your guard or confused at unexpected occurrences. And in life, it is the unexpected that is always happening. We need to keep always our mind present with us. We want it always on the spot, ready to use in any direction. Our thought is not on the spot when we tie a shoestring and think a mile from that shoestring when we mend a pencil and dwell in one of tomorrow's cares. It is then away, and if it has for a lifetime been in the habit of so straying from the act in hand to the act afar, it becomes more and more difficult to bring it back to use, and more difficult to use it promptly when it is brought back. Our thought moves from one thing to another with more than electric speed, and we can unconsciously train this quickness to be ever darting from one thing to another until it becomes almost impossible to keep it on one thing for 10 consecutive seconds. On the contrary, through cultivation of repose and deliberation in all things, we can train ourselves to mass and fasten our thought on anything as long as we please, to throw ourselves into any mood of mind we please, and to throw ourselves at will into sleep or a semi-conscious, dreamy state as restful as sleep. These are very small parts of the possibilities for the human mind. There is no limit to its growth or the increase of its power, and no thing coming within the limits of our imagination but can be accomplished by it. The steps to these attainments are very small, very simple, and relatively easy. So simple and easy that some reject them for that reason. Unquestionably, these powers and many results coming of their exercise were known ages ago to a relative few. But any power or any condition of mind consequent upon it can be made more clear to an English-speaking people through the use of an English word or form of expression than by terms taken from other languages. The North American Indian and the Oriental had in cases the power of so dismissing all thought and making their minds, in a sense, a blank, as to become not only insensible to fear, but this mental condition rendered their bodies almost insensible to physical suffering. It was the power of inducing this mental condition which enabled the Indian, when taken captive, to withstand every device of torture inflicted by his captors, and to sing his death song under the infliction of fire and a slow process of bodily mutilation too horrible for description, and which very few of our race could endure without passing into the frenzy of agony. The Indian is far more reposeful and deliberate than the majority of our race, in both mental and physical movement. Unconsciously cultivating this repose, and living a life less artificial than ours, he increased his spiritual power, one result of which is that command of mind over body, which can lessen physical pain, and as an ultimate possibility, banish it altogether. Deliberation of movement, or in plainer English, movement of muscles so slow that our mind has time to follow it, gives one time to think in great and small emergencies. But the lack of such training causes unconscious physical action. So confirmed becomes this habit that the body moves without us aware of it. Awkwardness, lack of address, lack of tact are all due to this lack of command of mind caused by lack of deliberation, or in other words, a trained incapacity for taking time to think or plan the proper thing to do. The terror-stricken person, if the ship seems in sudden danger, runs up and down the deck to no purpose. And this physical action is an exact correspondence of the lifelong condition of his mind, whose thought has been ever so darting from one thing to another, just as the whim seized him. The more deliberate person whose mind is trained to take time to think and hold or concentrate its thought, holds himself steady, and so gives himself time to see what may be the opportunities for escape. And these two persons would pick up a pin in a very different manner and with very different mental action and method. To train then for courage is to train for deliberate movement in all things. For that is simply training to mass and hold your force in reserve and let out no more than is needed for the moment. No quality of mind is more needful to success in all undertakings than courage. And by courage, I mean not only courage to act, but courage to think. In everyday business, thousands dare not think of taking a step which would involve an outlay of money above the average of their expenditure. They are appalled at mention of so large a sum. They will not, out of pure fright, entertain the idea long enough to familiarize themselves with it. Now, if they reverse this mental action, and instead of immediately giving a way out of lifelong habit to this fright, would take time and allow the thought to rest in their minds instead of driving it out, there would in time come to them ideas concerning ways and means for meeting the additional expense, and thereby making a larger sum of money in the same time it took to make the small sum. For instance, you say to the woman who goes out to wash by the day and has never done anything else, "Mrs. A, why don't you start a laundry? You can make a great deal more money in so doing." "I start a laundry? Where in the world is the money coming from to start a laundry?" is her reply. Here the woman, instead of entertaining your idea, gives way immediately to fright concerning what seems to her the immense sum required, and following the same unreasoning, headlong, panicky style of thought, sets up in a moment in opposition to your proposition. She dare think only of working for days' wages as she is called upon by those who hire her. And thousands for this reason dare not think, or find it disagreeable for them to think of getting into some broader, responsible, and more profitable sphere of business, because they bunch at once all its possible difficulties into a mass, and out of mere habit will look only at that awful and imaginary bunch. But Mrs. C, the more deliberate washerwoman, hears your proposition and entertains it. In time, she says to herself, "Why should I not start a laundry? Other people have and have succeeded." She lives in the idea, talks to one and another about it, and finds out how they started. The longer she keeps in this current of thought, the more plainly does she see the ways and means by which other people have set up for themselves. Finally, the idea so grows upon her that she takes some step toward that end, and then another, and so by degrees drifts into the business. A person is cool and collected in face of any great danger because he has the power of holding his mind to the thing to be done on the instant. Cowardice has no such power, and can see in mind not only the source of danger, but a score of possible results which may or may not happen to him. In battle, one man may attend to his duty with a vivid and by no means agreeable condition of mind as he sees men struck and mangled all about him. But the force or thought he can bring to bear on the performance of his duty is greater in amount than that coming of the realization of the slaughter around him, and commands and holds his body to his post. The man who runs, or would if he had the chance, cannot fix his mind on anything but the fearful possibilities of the moment. In the so-called trivial act of picking up a pin, or threading a needle, or opening a door, I do not argue that all one's force or thought should be placed on the act, but only enough to perform the act well while the rest is kept in reserve. It is in substance the same as in picking up a weight. You would not try to expend the force in lifting 1 pound that you would in lifting 50 pounds. You do expand a great deal more force in the act of picking up a pin when your mind is preoccupied with something else, for you are then trying to do 2 things or lift 2 weights at once. You will remember that anything which is done in mind expands quite as much force as if done with the body, so that the person who linger abed in the morning and think with dread of the breakfast to be cooked or the rooms to be swept, so far as expenditure of force is concerned, will be doing those acts then and there while lying on their backs. In expending just force enough to perform an act, a capacity which will gradually grow upon you as you familiarize yourself with this idea and set your desire or demand upon it, you cultivate and increase continually that desirable state of mind, which in everyday language is known as having your wits about you. That means, in other words, always having, no matter what you are doing, your mental eyes open in every direction. And while outwardly you seem all intent and occupied in the one act, your mind or spirit, like a vigilant sentinel, is continually on the lookout so as to give you notice in the fractional part of an instant of all that is going on about you, and also to direct you how to meet the event, whatever it may be. This is not only the characteristic of courage, but of tact and address. It was this electric vigilance and mind watchfulness that gave an American officer during the Revolution who, in the confusion of battle, suddenly found himself in the front of a British regiment, the deliberation to ask, "What troops are these?" "The Royal Scots," was the reply. "Royal Scots, remain as you are," was his answer, and he rode off to his own lines. That man had a mind trained to give him time to think. On one occasion, Mrs. Farren, the celebrated English actress, discovered where her part required her to hem a handkerchief that the property man had forgotten to lay out the handkerchief needle, thread, etc. Without a moment's hesitation, she sat down and imitated, so naturally, the motion and manner of a lady in sewing that most of her audience never suspected the omission. The act involved self-possession, coolness, deliberation, presence of mind, courage. Do not all these terms imply a similar state of mind? A woman habitually hurried and flurried could not have done this, and I believe that when Mrs. Farren saw proper to pick up a pin, she did so in a much more deliberate manner than would the habitually hurried, flurried man or woman. Cultivate deliberate act and movement in all things, and you lay more and more the solid foundation for courage, either moral or physical. But deliberate act does not always imply slowness. Just as thought moves with electric rapidity, so may it move the body when occasion requires. But the thought must be clearly planned, seen and outlined in mind before it is allowed to act on the body. It is so seen or planned, and so acts to use the muscles in the rapid thrust and parry of the skilled fencer. Similarly with the professional danseuse, in fact, in all superior accomplishments, be they of painter, musician, or other artist. These, however, in many cases, are but partial controls of mind. Outside of his art, the artist may have little mental control or deliberation, and as a result be nervous, vacillating, easily disturbed, whimsical, and timid. The mind is our garrison to be armed at all points and disciplined to meet any emergency. We deal with the making or self-making of whole men and women whose minds are not cultivated all in one direction and neglected everywhere else. It is far better in the end to be growing symmetrically and to be finished so far as we have grown all around, than to have our power all concentrated on one talent or capacity and becoming what the world calls a genius. The inside history of genius is often a sad one and shows that it brought little happiness to its possessor. Scores and hundreds of the little acts of everyday life, such as picking dropped articles from the floor, opening and shutting drawers, laying or reaching for articles on the toilet table, and attending to minor details of dress, are done unconsciously in this hurried condition of mind, especially when some more important object engages our attention. We snatch, we clutch, we drive recklessly about in the doing of these things, and we weaken our bodies and become tired out, and finally panicky and easily frightened through this mental habit, for fear and cowardice slip in far more easily when the body is weak. This habit cannot be changed in a day or a year when it has prevailed a lifetime. Neither can the ills, mental and physical, resulting from such habit be cured immediately. There can be only gradual growth away from them. If in reading this you feel convinced that there is something in it, and feel also a conviction that some portion of it suits your own case, your cure has then commenced. Real conviction, the conviction that comes from within, never leaves one or stops working to get out of the evil way and put us in the good one. It may seem buried and forgotten for seasons, and our erroneous habits may seem growing stronger than ever. That is not so. But as convictions take root, we are seeing our errors more and more clearly. We forget that at one time we were blind and did not see them at all. If this book brings to you a conviction of a long-established error, it is not I individually who bring or convince. It is only that I put out more or less of a truth which takes hold of you, and the cord of truth in you senses it. If I apply the torch to the gas jet and light it, it does not follow that I make either the fire or the gas. I am only a means or agent for lighting that gas. No man makes or invents a truth. Truth is a general and widely spread and belongs to every individual as much as the air we breathe, and there is pleasure enough in being its torchbearer without presuming to claim the power of its creator. Above all, demand more and more courage of the supreme power. End of chapter 4. All right, I'll meet you at the next video with chapter 5.